Good afternoon. I'm Parissa Fatehi Weeks. Like Nora said, I'm with Google Fiber and the Housing Works Board. In brief, at Google Fiber, we firmly believe that access to the internet is access to opportunity, and so we've been really privileged to partner with many of you in this room, including the Housing Authority of the City of Austin, to connect public housing residents to high-speed internet, but also digital literacy training and devices. We know that no single investment is actually going to dismantle the entire pipeline of inequities that we've been discussing today, but we are humbled and privileged to play a role in it and be a part of the village working on the issues. So, speaking of privilege, I am very honored to introduce our closing speaker today, Diane Yentel. Diane is the president and CEO of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, which is dedicated solely to achieving socially just public policy that assures people with the lowest incomes in the United States have affordable and decent homes. Diane is a veteran policy expert and advocate with nearly 2 decades of work on affordable housing and community development issues. And before joining NLIHC, Diane was actually Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs at Enterprise Community Partners. She serves on the boards of directors at the National Housing Conference, Homes for America, and the Coalition of Human Needs. She also has curly hair like I do, so we're a part of the same club. So thank you, Diane, for your leadership and for being here today.
Thanks. It's the first time my curly hair has been noted in an introduction, and I love it. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here today. Oh, I guess I'm using this mic instead. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. I know it's been a long day and a really interesting conversation, and I'm thrilled to be here to sort of wind it all down and together and talk about the housing crisis, its solutions, and how we work together to build the political will to actually achieve those solutions. So we certainly have our work cut out for us in the housing field. And you've talked about some of this throughout the day. So the housing crisis has reached historic heights, and it's most negatively impacting the lowest income people. So the crisis is pervasive. It's impacting rural, urban, suburban communities alike. And nationally, we have a shortage of over 7 million homes that are affordable and available to the lowest income people. So another way of looking at that is to say, for every 100 of the lowest income renters, these are seniors, they're people with disabilities, they're families with children, for every 100 of them, nationally, there are just 35 homes that are affordable and available to them. And you can see from the map that the shortage ranges from most severe, including in Texas, where there are just 30 homes for every 100 people who need them, to least severe. But there is no state, there is no community where there is a sufficient supply of homes that are affordable and available for those lowest income households. So another piece of research that we put out at the coalition is called Out of Reach. And that's where we come up with what we call the housing wage. This is the amount that somebody has to earn an hour just to be able to afford to rent a modest 2- or 1-bedroom apartment. So nationally, the housing wage is $20.20 an hour to afford to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. And it's a little over $17 an hour to be able to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. There's a wide range here as well. And clearly, these housing wages are far out of reach for minimum wage workers. They're also out of reach for average renters. So the average renter nationally earns somewhere between $15 and $19 an hour. In places where they tend to earn more, housing tends to cost more. So the gap remains the same throughout the country. And for the average renter with their average renter wages, they can afford to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in 11% of counties across the country, and can afford to rent a 1-bedroom apartment in less than half of US counties nationally. This will be an issue for the foreseeable future. So the Department of Labor puts out its projections of the jobs that are expected to have the greatest growth over the next 10 years. And 7 out of 10 of those jobs pay less than what it costs to rent a one-bedroom apartment. This is a profile of needs, housing needs here in Texas. We do these profiles for every state, every metro area, every congressional district. You can see that number in red. That's the absolute shortage of affordable and available homes for the lowest income people in Texas. In Austin, the shortage is about a little over 40,000 units. And in the bottom right-hand corner, we see the result of this shortage, and that is that the majority, in most communities, the vast majority of extremely low-income renters are severely cost-burdened. So they're paying at least half of their income towards rent. So when you have such limited income to begin with, and you're spending 50, 60, 70% of it to keep a roof over your head, there's very little left for all of life's other necessities. And you are one paycheck, one financial emergency, one sick child, one broken down car away from not being able to pay the rent, facing possible eviction and homelessness. So this is why we have homelessness in our country. This is why, despite the best efforts of communities like Austin and others around the country, it's why homelessness in some communities is on the rise again for the first time in many years. And it's why tent cities, sometimes housing children, are becoming increasingly common sights. So we have homelessness and we have housing poverty in our country because the programs that make homes affordable for the lowest income people are severely underfunded, and they have been for a long time. So unlike Social Security, unlike food assistance, unlike, to some extent, healthcare, housing, while a critical human need, is not an entitlement. So it's funded, there is an arbitrary budget cap, and then within that budget cap, it's first come, first served. So we have a system in our country today where just 1 in every 4 households who needs housing assistance and is eligible for it receives any at all. So 75% of people in our country who need housing assistance, are eligible for housing assistance, receives none. They are the people who are waiting in line, adding their names to years and sometimes decades-long waiting lists, hoping to win what is essentially a housing lottery. So it's important to know that this housing lottery system and the homelessness that exists in our country today didn't always exist. We didn't always have a system of shelters and people sleeping on streets and in cars and in trailers. And it wasn't that long ago when we didn't. If we went back to the late 1970s, we'd find a time in our country where we housed nearly everyone. And at that time, we actually had a small surplus of homes that were affordable and available to the lowest income people. And so the main difference between then and now is federal funding. So if we took the dollars, 1970s dollars, and put them in today's dollars, we'd find that back then, we had the authority to spend 3 times as much on HUD's programs that we do today. And that one-time spending increase in 2008, 2009, that was one-time spending to respond to the foreclosure crisis. And if we zoomed into that 2010 to 2000, and if we carried it forward to today, we'd see that there's been a further decline in spending for these programs because of what's called the Budget Control Act, which was enacted back in 2010 and has meant really tight spending caps for all spending, including HUD spending. So we are starting to turn a corner. Last year, for the FY18 HUD budget, we were able to achieve a 10% increase to HUD's spending. This was a historic one-time increase, and it's especially remarkable considering that the president had actually proposed cutting HUD's budget by 15%. And Congress rejected that proposal and instead increased HUD's budget by 10%. So these kind of budget increases don't happen on their own, right? They are a testament to the power of advocacy and what happens when people educate their members of Congress and urge their members of Congress to do more. We still have much more to do because even with that 10% increase accounted for, this is what HUD's budget looks like over the last 10 years. There are still significant declines, still significant cuts that we have to recover from and continuing increasing funding. And this year, I will say, will be even harder to maintain that increased funding because we are back again this year under very tight spending caps from the Budget Control Act. And so we have to work to make sure those caps are lifted and that HUD again gets the largest share of the increased funding. So the National Housing Trust Fund is a program that was created precisely to meet this need, to fill this gap of homes for the lowest income people. At its current funding level, 100% of the money goes to build or preserve homes for the lowest income people, and it's working. The first year's funding allocation of $174 million have so far built or preserved close to 2,000 apartments for the lowest income people, and they're really housing the lowest income, the most vulnerable people in our communities. Here in Texas, there's about 3, I believe, developments that have been created through Housing Trust Fund dollars, and they are housing youth aging out of foster care, people who are chronically homeless, and seniors with disabilities. And it's like this throughout the country. The challenge with this program, like other programs, is that it's so underfunded compared to the need. And so the work we have before us is to expand the Housing Trust Fund significantly in this Congress and in future Congresses. So the bad news is that the crisis is growing, more people are experiencing homelessness, and until very recently, resources are declining. The good news is that this, of all the problems that we face in our country, this is one of the most solvable, right? It's not by any means easy to solve the housing crisis, but it's pretty simple. And we have the data, we have the research, we have the solutions, proven solutions to ending homelessness and ending the housing crisis. The only thing we lack is the political will to fund those solutions at the scale necessary. So much of our work needs to be about how we build that political will, build a movement to increase investments to the scale we need. And there's a few ways that we're doing that. One is through National Housing Week of Action. We did this for the first time a couple years ago. We asked communities across the country to hold events, rallies, direct actions, press events, to educate local communities and the country about the housing crisis and its solutions. So here in Austin, you all stepped up, held a great event a couple years ago, and nationally we had about 60 events in 30 communities. So we did it again last year. We doubled our impact. We had 120 events in 64 communities across the country, and we'll do it again this year. And I hope you all will start planning now for some events you can hold that week. Every year we do it, we're increasing the momentum and the attention that these events are getting. Last year we had over 50 members of Congress, senators and US representatives participate in some way in the Housing Week of Action. So another way that we build our movement and we build the political will is by expanding our coalitions. You know, many of us have been doing this work for many years, and despite our best efforts, the crisis is getting worse. So we have to do things differently. And one of the things I think we most need to recognize is that it cannot just be people who care deeply about housing who are asking for more resources for housing. We have to go beyond housers. And that becomes easier today because we have this growing body of research making such a clear, compelling case for how central housing affordability is to the outcomes of so many other sectors, right? We know when we're affordably housed, our health improves. Our kids do better in school. We earn more over our lifetimes. We even live longer. So we started asking ourselves the question of whether leaders of other sectors were convinced by the research to recognize that they're not going to be successful in achieving their own goals until more people are affordably housed. And if with that recognition, they are willing to join us in advocacy for more federal investments in affordable housing. So we asked the question, and the answer was a resounding yes. We launched the Opportunity Starts at Home campaign with a steering committee of really powerful leaders in non-housing sectors. So we have, for example, the National Education Association, the largest teachers union in the country. These are teachers who are seeing kids, churning in and out of their classrooms because of homelessness or housing instability. And they're recognizing the challenges that that creates, not just for those individual children and their families, but for the entire classroom and for the teacher's ability to teach. So these teachers are joining now in the advocacy to say we need more resources for affordable housing. Same in the healthcare industry, Community Catalyst and Children's Health Watch, groups that were at the forefront of getting the Affordable Care Act enacted. Children's Health Watch did a study recently where they found that over the next 10 years, we'll spend $111 billion in avoidable healthcare costs because of housing instability. So they're joining now to say, what if we invested a fraction of that in affordable housing? What kind of outcomes could we have? We have the civil rights sector, NAACP and Unidos US, and anti-hunger, anti-poverty, faith-based groups, disability groups, social workers, National League of Cities, and it's growing. We'll have new partners we'll be announcing soon in the criminal justice field and the LGBTQ field. So more and more we have these new partners who are bringing their networks, their partner organizations, there we go, to the work, to the advocacy, these new networks that we can mobilize when it comes time to call people to action. This is a group that's participating in our roundtable. You can see it's mostly non-housing groups, all new partners that are joining with us on this advocacy work. We're doing the campaigns in 7 states initially, similar kind of multi-sector partnerships growing there, and our intention is to do it throughout the country in the coming years. So the other way that we build political will and our movement is by elevating the issue in the national consciousness, right? In discussions, in the news, in traditional media and social media. And there's no doubt that we're breaking through in new ways. These are stories that NLIC tracks that we helped shape in some way, whether it's TV or radio or print stories. And you can see the growth in coverage. You're not imagining it if you think that you're reading more about affordable housing and the crisis and about its solutions. You see it every day when you pick up the local paper. This has a tremendous impact. It educates the local community about the issues, and it creates urgency and pressure on policymakers to put forward solutions. Another way a really foundational way that we build the movement and build the political will is by empowering and enabling low-income people to participate in our democracy. The differences between who votes, who registers, and who votes in elections is pretty stark. This is broken down by tenure. The percentage of homeowners who vote compared to the percentage of renters. And when we break it down by income, it's even more stark. So for those of you who have asked yourselves, as I have for many years, what's it going to take to get policymakers to prioritize the needs of low-income renters? This is what it's going to take, changing this equation. Because when you look at these numbers, it's no wonder why our national housing policy skews so heavily towards higher income homeowners. And until lower income renters are voting and are seen as a powerful voting bloc, policymakers will never prioritize their needs, right? But changing these numbers changes everything. So we have lots of materials available, webinars, best practices, legal advice on how you can do this. And I hope that each of you who cares about solving the housing crisis sees how much this has to be part of your work, a part of all of our work, in order for us to achieve the kind of change we're trying to. And we're starting to see the change. We are starting to see the change at the polls. We're seeing that housing is a winning election issue. I mean, the work that you all did here to achieve the $250 million housing bond is incredible. You're not alone, right? The 2018 elections saw dozens of ballot initiatives for increased resources, increased resident protections, resident rights across the country. So Texas, California, Washington, Oregon, Nebraska, Utah, North Carolina, South Carolina. Altogether, these ballot initiatives that passed means billions of dollars in new resources for affordable housing, and it means new partnerships and new momentum to do more. At the federal level, too, we're seeing policymakers responding to this urgency and to this crisis in new ways, in far more ambitious ways than we've seen really in decades. Each of these members of Congress, some who are no longer members of Congress, but in the last year, each of them introduced major, ambitious, bold policy proposals, the likes of which we really haven't seen in a long time. Not much less of the kind of tinkering around the edges and small bore changes, and much more a willingness to recognize the scale of investment necessary to solve the crisis and put forward proposals to do it. So we had Senators Booker and Harris and Representative Lee, Senator Heller, Joe Crowley, all introduce $70, $80 billion a year renters tax credits. Senator Warren and Representative Lee introduced bills to increase housing trust fund dollars to $45 billion a year. None of these are going to pass anytime soon, but it completely changes the conversation about what's acceptable to be proposing and what's possible when it comes time for compromise. And of course, those senators up in the left-hand side have something else in common beyond being senators. They're all running for president, which gives us another tremendous opportunity this year. It's not just them, it's also Julian Castro, former HUD secretary, John Delaney, Senator Klobuchar, all senators, leaders who care about affordable housing, who have differing proposals, who want to talk about those proposals. The fact that we had Senators Warren, Booker, and Harris feel a need to put forward what's essentially their housing plank before they even said they were running for president shows us that this is really a new time. And that, again, for the first time in my lifetime, we will see affordable housing as a campaign issue in the presidential elections. We already in these first few weeks of this campaign. We've seen affordable housing talked about in CNN town halls or in family rooms in New Hampshire and Iowa more than we have in the entire presidential campaign cycle in previous years. So it's another really tremendous opportunity for us to elevate the issues. So, I've talked about the possibilities and about the hope, and I don't want to understate the challenges, just how challenging this time is, right? For low-income people and low-income communities are facing threats in their lives and to the programs that serve them that are greater than we've seen in a long time. And the crisis is growing, and the resources are dwindling, and we have so much more to do. But we are making progress, and I really believe we are on the cusp of big change. And one thought I just want to leave you with is that when we look at social justice movements throughout the decades, for most successful movements, there's a precipitating event. It's kind of this unknowable, unpredictable moment that takes years of sustained energy and action and thrusts the issue into public consciousness. So like the Me Too movement was actually created over a decade ago, but it took last year's revelations to make it go viral and become as powerful as it is today. So it's kind of a slow and steady burn and a sudden spark when big change becomes possible. So what we do now, how we harness the need and the fear, the challenges and the success, and how we take this moment of extraordinary challenge and exhilarating possibility is really up to us. And I think that if we get this right, these can be the years that we look back to and say, despite the challenges, despite the odds, maybe because of them, we did the work. We told the stories, we shared the data, we mobilized, we organized, we expanded our coalitions, we voted, and we prepared. And when the spark was lit, we were ready. So I want to thank you for the work that you do every day. Thank you for your dedication and your tenacity, and thank you for your activity now and in the years to come. It's never been more important. Thank you. So I think we have a couple minutes. We have a couple minutes for questions. And I think we have a few mics that people have to take around. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer a few.
Could you tell us more about what's planned for the National Housing Week?
So the plan is what you want to make it. So we set aside a week when we ask people across the country to hold any kind of events to call attention to the housing crisis and to ask for more resources at the federal level. So the dates that we set aside are, as we did last year, are sort of a combination of dates when members of Congress will be back home for a long weekend and for a break, and then we'll be back in DC for some floor speeches and for potentially some activities there as well. So we're asking you and others in Austin and across the country to think about what kind of events make sense here. In the past, there's really been a range of events, everything from direct actions to rallies to press events to publishing a report, your report on affordable housing that week, to sit-ins, to educational sessions with the community. It's really been a wide range. And what we do is we provide sort of the hashtag, the materials, the logos that you can put on all of your events, the signs, the t-shirts, to tie it all together under one name and under one ask for more federal resources. So we'll send out something soon to our network kind of announcing the dates and sharing some of the resources that'll be available, and then we'll be following up asking people to let us know what the plans are for local events.
So one of the big threats for these manufactured home communities throughout the country is the community closure is the biggest risk, because investors are looking to purchase those and turn the land into a more lucrative use. So there's been multiple community closures and a tremendous amount of outside investment just coming into real estate in the hot markets, and I'm wondering if you're seeing that in other places as well. The Carlyle Group has purchased tons of property, and there's a Singapore investment group that's been coming in. So I'm just wondering if you're seeing that other places.
It's a great question. It's happening all over the country. It's actually in the rental housing market too. It's kind of this new. It's not so new anymore, but a newer phenomenon. The whole rental housing market has changed since the foreclosure crisis. And I think a lot of our policies and a lot of even the way we talk about the solutions hasn't quite caught up with what the new reality is, where the rental market used to be predominantly sort of mom and pop owners of smaller apartment buildings or just a few units. And after the foreclosure crisis, when we had so many homeowners losing their homes, we had a lot of Wall Street investors coming in and buying up those properties and rental properties. And now some of the biggest landlords in the country are big Wall Street firms who are very far removed from the properties, from the communities, and from the residents, and it's leading to a lot of the, frankly, rent gouging that we're seeing in a lot of communities across the country. So it's absolutely a challenge that we all face together and are still, I think, trying to figure out what the solutions to those challenges are. Certainly resident protections are, and some of the ballot initiatives I talked about earlier are related to that. Requiring that there be, essentially making no-cause evictions illegal and requiring that there be a cause before a tenant can be evicted, so landlords can't just evict people so that they can raise the rents and get in a tenant who can pay more. Right to counsel kind of laws are increasing across the country, and similar types of protections and solutions like that. It's a good question. Other questions? Let's see. Abundant housing policies. What do we mean by that? That's interesting. I like the sound of it. Who wrote that? Well, abundant housing, I think that's everything I just talked about, which is significant resources for the need that exists. And states or markets that are closing the gap or slowing the growth of it, we are starting to see a little bit of a shift. We'll have our new gap numbers coming out in 2 weeks with the latest ACS data, and there's a slight improvement where now there's only a shortage of 7 million homes affordable and available for the lowest income people, as opposed to 7.2 last year and 7.4 the year before. So there are some small incremental change that's happening. I think a lot of that has to do with, as we've seen the federal government really turn its back on its commitment and the level of investments we had previously. We've seen a lot of cities and states sort of step up to try to fill that gap. So a lot of the new resources I talked about earlier, California's really led the way with multi-billion-dollar initiatives on homelessness and permanent supportive housing. So I think those are starting to make that change, but clearly with a gap that enormous, we really need the federal investments back at the level that they were previously to actually solve the crisis. I think we're out of time. I have this lovely sign saying wrap, please. So I will. So thank you all again for your time, and thanks for your great work.